New haircut. I don't like it.
And thing sucks!
Hello friends, DaVinci here. I was thinking, I've already got two expensive hobbies, home lab and photography. What other hobby should I pick to completely deplete our savings account? Oh, I know! Fish keeping! I keep getting asked in the comments about those tanks in the background, so in today's video, instead of talking about service and whatnot, I'll tell you all about them and how they came to be. From a very young age, I loved animals. Growing up in Ukraine back in the 80s, I've had different kinds of pets. I have vague memories from when I was a toddler of a bowl with a goldfish in our apartment. Then, when I was about 5 years old or so, my dad brought home a kitten to ward off a mice infestation in our building. It lived with us for almost 6 years, but then it ran away never to be seen again. Went to live on a farm probably. Yeah. In my early teens, a friend's hamster had a litter and my mom allowed me to adopt one of the babies. Sadly, hamsters don't have a long lifespan, so my little buddy was only with me for a couple of years. Then, at my 15th birthday party, a parakeet flew in and landed right on my granddad's shoulder and just stayed with us. He obviously escaped from another home because he wasn't afraid of humans and could talk as parrots do. We could hardly make out what he was saying, but I distinctly heard him name drop Gorbachev. After a while, he also learned to repeat my mom's favorite phrase, "Dmitry, do your homework!" Fun times. I had to give him away to a local pet shop when our family was immigrating to the US in '92 because I wasn't allowed to bring him along. Besides, he wouldn't have survived the trip anyway. First few years in America are tough for immigrants. We came with practically nothing, so pets were far from our minds. My love for animals, though, never faded. In late 90s, when I was already working, my boss had a fully kitted out saltwater aquarium in his office. It looked to be about 20 or 30 gallon with top-of-the-line equipment. Lights, a protein skimmer, a sump, a chiller, the works. It was gorgeous with beautiful corals and colorful marine fish. Ever since then, it's become my dream to someday have a huge tank that takes up like an entire wall in the room, the kind you have to go scuba diving to clean. He didn't mind us keeping small tanks on our desks as long as it didn't interfere with the work. Another coworker went with me to a local Petco and helped with buying a freshwater starter kit. A 10-gallon tank with lights, a basic hang-on-back filter, heater, thermometer, gravel, and other decorations like fake plants. We used water from those big jugs for top-loading water dispensers that you can find in any office. It was great while it lasted. Unfortunately, the upper management must have noticed that employee morale was too high and cracked the whip. Fish tanks had to go. I brought mine home, but it didn't work out. I asked forgiveness in advance for what I'm about to tell you. You see, I had zero clue about how to keep fish properly. I didn't know the first thing about the nitrogen cycle or water parameters for different fish species, or how to pick up tank mates. My only defense is that this was before the internet was as ubiquitous as it is today. So my research was limited to a local bookstore and friends' advice. I overstocked that tank and overfed the fish and kept the lights on for way too long. Needless to say, the fish didn't last very long in those conditions. I populated it with way too many fish for its size and mixed species that could never coexist peacefully in such a tight space. For example, the guppies would get pecked to death by the aggressive tiger barbs within a day. I fought against algae blooms on a weekly basis and just couldn't understand why. Of course, now I have a much better understanding of why I couldn't keep anything but the hardiest of the fish alive longer than a few weeks. Because of overcrowding, overfeeding, and without live plants, the level of ammonia must have been through the roof. The almost daily water changes that I was doing probably hurt more than they helped, since at home I didn't have access to freshly delivered water jugs, so I was using tap water without any chemicals to dechlorinate it. Again, sorry to all the fishes that my ignorance murdered. After a few months of the struggle, I finally gave up, broke down the now lifeless tank, and swore off the fish keeping forever. Or so I thought.
75 years later.
Not too long ago, right before the pandemic started, my in-laws brought us a small fish bowl with 3 glowfish tetras. Apparently their tenants moved out and left the fish behind, so they brought them to me. What was I gonna do? Of course I kept them. But this time around, I did a ton of research. Fish keeping websites, YouTube channels, Discord servers. I gobbled up any and all information I could get my hands on. I wanted to give these fishes my best attempt. Straight away, I bought a 13-gallon tank with a decent filter and a water testing kit and began cycling it just to get the little guys out of the tiny bowl. After a few weeks, the parameters stabilized and I moved the tetras to their new home. I had one algae bloom that I dealt with by limiting the amount of light to 4 hours per day and getting a cleanup crew consisting of a hillstream loach, a bunch of cherry shrimps, one amano shrimp, and a couple of snails. Once that was taken care of, I introduced more live plants. I started with a couple of dwarf anubias, some java fern, and lots of hornwort. So much hornwort. I also changed the filter to a one with a power head for a higher water flow rate to simulate the currents that loaches need. I also added a couple of more black skirt tetras, a betta, and even a dwarf crayfish at one point. For the first time in over 1 year, I have not lost a single fish. In fact, they started breeding, and new tiny babies would appear every few months. That was quite an achievement for me. I mean, if they breed, I must be doing something right, right?
Am I right or am I right or am I right? Right.
It reached a point where the 13-gallon tank was too cramped for the amount of fish, so I bought a new 20-gallon long aquarium and after cycling it, moved all the inhabitants and plants into it. The shrimps, they were not doing so well at first. I saw a few babies from time to time, but they would disappear the next day. I figured the fish were probably eating them. But after a while of being very persistent little workers, there hatched so many shrimps that I lost count. I decided that it was time to separate the shrimps into their own tank to give them an even better chance to establish a colony. I set up a small 3-gallon cube with shrimp-friendly substrate and plants. After it cycled, I moved over probably half the shrimpies out of the larger tank. For some reason though, that colony just couldn't get started. It would be fine for a week or two, but then the shrimps would start dying in droves even though the water parameters were fine. The only explanation I can think of is fluctuations in water temperature. I kept that tank in my office next to my desk, which was up in the attic, and in the summer AC could barely keep the temps below 90 degrees. Cherry shrimps really need consistent parameters to survive, so temperature swings in such a small body of water were probably too much for them. I tried for about 6 months to get that shrimp tank going, moving about 20 cherries each time. After a while, my wife started calling me a serial shrimp killer, at which point I decided to stop. The attic thing just wasn't working out. In late 2024, we were moving to a new house where I would have the run of the entire basement. This place. I found a great deal on Craigslist for a used 125-gallon tank with a stand that was in okay shape. It was quite larger than any aquarium I've ever had. Not quite take up the entire wall large, but it's a start. The tank itself was solid, but the stand was quite old and falling apart. There is no way it would support the tank by itself, much less with substrate and water. Following the tutorial of the great Joey, aka the king of DIY on YouTube, I pretty much rebuilt the frame on the inside from scratch using 2x4s. I braced each corner with 2 beams, added 2 more in the center, and connected them with longer 2x4s in a rectangle. The sides and doors is pretty much the only things left from the original stand, and they're just decorative at this point. For the tank's filtration, I was originally going to reuse all the plumbing and the sump that came with the tank, but very quickly realized that wasn't something I could do on my own. So I removed the overflow boxes, siliconed over the holes, and went with a standalone canister filter, Fluval FX6. I wished I filmed the process of me rebuilding the stands and modding the tank. It would have made for a great montage. Oh well, here's a picture of a puppy instead. Unfortunately, the floors in this basement are more crooked than politicians in Congress, so I had to shim the tank very heavily to properly level it. I wanted a heavily planted tank again, and for substrate I went with plant-friendly Carib Sea Eco Complete. It took 5 20-pound bags to get it to 2 inches deep. I got a bunch of rocks at my local fish store as well as a large wooden log. Can't even see it anymore because of how thick the moss grew in all around it, but trust me, it's there. Even after a year, the water still has that brownish color because of the tannins seeping from the wood. It's fine though, tannins are healthy for the fish, and to be honest, this black water look is starting to grow on me. I went full DIY with the lights. All you need is an extension cord, a light socket, plastic flower pot, an LED bulb, and some electrical tape to make a light. I cut a hole in the bottom of the flower pot, stuck the light socket through it, spliced a decapitated extension cord, and that was it. I hanged 2 lights off the ceiling with a hook and a cord for picture frame hanging thing. Doesn't look like much, but works great. I have both lights plugged into a Zigbee switch that's controlled by Home Assistant with a daily schedule. Ties it nicely back to the home lab. Once the big tank was properly cycled, I moved the fishies into it, leaving the shrimps in the 20-gallon on their own. I got a cheap metal stand for it, also requiring some shimming. I don't know who did the floors in this basement or what they were smoking when they did. Anyway, after I moved the fish out, the shrimp population simply exploded. At this point there must be hundreds of them in there, and I love it. The 125-gallon turned into a community tank over time. As of right now, there's about 10 or 11 black skirt tetras. Very difficult to count them while they dart around. There are 5 X-ray tetras, 3 platies, one of them a recently hatched baby, 5 corridoras, 4 zebra danios, and a couple of cardinal tetras and guppies. I don't see any aggression between all of them, and the heavy foliage must be helping too. The plants in this tank are Amazon sword, valves, some recently planted dwarf hairgrass, and a metric ton of Christmas moss. I also added a couple of air stones for water surface agitation, which helps with oxygen exchange. The 20-gallon shrimp tank is planted in a similar way, but in here valves took pretty much over everything. I better do some trimming during the next water change. Speaking of, I usually do small water changes or just top-ups every week, but I haven't cleaned the filter in several months, so let's do that together. Fluval FX6 makes it quite easy. I'll unplug it, close in and out valves. Attach a hose to the drain port, and get some of the water out into a bucket to make it easier to move the filter. Oops! I'll save that water for rinsing the sponges as not to disturb the beneficial bacteria that's been growing on them. Now the filter is easier to move around. I'll open it and remove the 3 plastic dividers. Each divider has sponges for mechanical filtration, and bag is full of ceramic cylinders which beneficial bacteria grow. I'll rinse the sponges in the old tank water just to remove large chunks of detritus and wash the plastic dividers under tap water. I won't touch the biological media though, it doesn't need washing. Then I'll put the dividers back together, reassemble the filter, and top it off with pre-treated tap water. Here's me putting in dechlorinator. Now I'll reassemble the filter and lock it down to prevent leaks. I'll reconnect the hoses by pushing them into their corresponding inlets until they click into place, open the valves, and power the filter on. At first the water will get cloudy as small chunks are flushed out, but it'll clear up in a few hours. Now it's time to clean the shrimp tank. I left it alone for more than a few weeks and the greenery grew completely out of control. I'll use the large net to scoop out most of the water moss, and then I'll use long scissors to cut the valves to a more manageable length. And then use the tweezers and a small net to remove the clippings. The filter in this tank also contains sponges with biological media. I'll disconnect it, and since it's small enough, I'll disassemble it in the sink. I'll wash out the plastic housing, gently tapping it to dislodge larger detritus chunks from the outlet holes. The sponges can be quickly rinsed under tap water, but once again I'm leaving the biomedia alone. After reassembling the filter, I'll place it back into the tank and connect it to power. The impaler speed valve on top allows me to control the water flow rate. Now the cover and lights can go back on. The water will still be murky for a little while, but should clear up quickly. I'll top off both tanks with pre-treated water from a bucket, and that's it. Cleaning done. I'll put some of the floating plants back because shrimp love to munch on their roots. The rest get thrown away. I know that dried plant trimmings can be used to make fish food, but I'm not quite there yet. I also don't do any gravel vacuuming in either tank because all of that decomposing stuff and fish poop is perfect food for the plants.
It's just pooper.
Live plants combined with the beneficial bacteria that grows on biological media inside filters help with the nitrogen cycle. They convert ammonia, which is deadly to the fish, into nitrites, and then into much less harmful nitrates that get removed during water changes. You know, cleaning fish tanks can look like a boring chore, but I don't feel that way. In fact, to me, it's very therapeutical. I mean, it's not building computers, but it's close.